All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Julia Ryan. I'm the Artist Resource Manager with the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture in Boston. And I'm here with my colleague Pascale, who has also been working with us these past several months on consolidating COVID-19 related resources for the arts sector in our region. So thank you, Pascale, for all your work and for being my partner on these calls. Today, we are having a follow-up call from our call last week. So we've been having these calls regularly over the past several months. And last week we had a call where we focused on hearing a few presentations about reopening from several guest speakers, and then also just putting together kind of a list of questions, giving folks an opportunity to ask more questions. And we've spent the last week gathering our team to come together and do what we do best, which is convening folks and try and get all those questions answered as well as we can. So just to back up a little bit, the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture is the City of Boston's Arts and Culture Department, and we are here for artists in Boston and beyond, and we're super excited to have you all today. And a few housekeeping rules. What we're going to do is we're going to start with some of the questions we received last week. We're going to go through those and do our best to answer those today. And then we're going to open it up to anyone who has any further questions that we can get to in the next hour. So if you could please share your questions if you're able to in the chat, that would be great. If you're not able to, we'll welcome you to unmute yourself if need be. And for all of our wonderful, esteemed, expert question answerers today, thank you all for joining us. If you have an answer, you have a comment, something you want to share, just feel free to jump in. Share your name, please, your organization or your affiliation while you're here today, your pronouns if you would like, and whatever your answer is. So without further ado, my colleague Pascale is going to share some of our questions from last week.
Awesome. So the first question we got from last week was, I'm a musician. I'm wondering, when can I start to rehearse again? So if there are any spaces who have been thinking about what that opening is like, if you could answer, when could some musicians start rehearsing? Or if there's outside or a Parks and Rec person here.
It looks like Matt would like to answer.
Hi, Matt McArthur of the Record Co., he, him, and so good to see you. Sorry, I can't remember the other thing I was supposed to share. So the Record Co. Is in the process of constructing a new rehearsal space. We expect to be open, we hope, around the end of October, maybe no later than mid-November. And so I can't, if we were open today, I would say that the kinds of things that we're concerned about when thinking about whether it's safe for people to be in our space are the amount of airflow, our ability to contact trace. So I'm just thinking about sort of advice that I would give as you evaluate other spaces that might be available. Are people being signed in and signed out so you can contact trace? How much open space is there? Is the organization or the space that you're going into conscious of social distancing practices? And so the answer is, I guess my answer would be you could rehearse immediately if you were able to adhere to some of the guidelines about physical distancing. As we think about it, it's more of a hotel use and less of a venue. So it is, compared to like going to a show, it's much easier to control the number of human beings that you're with. I apologize, I don't think that's a very good answer, but you know, good ventilation.
To add, hi, I'm Peter. For those of you I don't know yet, I hope we know each other soon. He, him, his, and I run the dance complex as well as being a choreographer. The dance complex is trying to open when in phase 3 when allowed, and we're preparing for that with and the reason I mention our space is that we're not sure how many dancers will come back to rehearse, you know, big group things. So we're just really open to theater and music. If you're interested in our space, for a solo musician to rehearse in a beautiful big dance studio, it's good ventilation. I think it's not so good for the cast of a chorus line to do such at this time. There's no place to spatially distance with that. So keep us. I'll put the website and my email in the chat. As we know more, we'll share more with you all. And if you're interested, please let me know.
Hey, Peter, it looks like we have a follow-up question about how much you think it will cost to rent your space from Anna. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. We subsidize every hour that we rent, so we're below market rates, as many of the dance studios have been around, and so we try to keep prices low. And it has been dependent on the size of the studio itself. So it can be as cheap as, I believe, especially 9 to 5 when there's not a lot of competition for space. It can be as cheap as $9 or $10 an hour. And if it's a larger space, since that's part of what we've been working on, it could be more, $15 an hour, something like that. So depending on the number of musicians, I think you want to be safe and where you are. But and I can also I can say that we can look at being more flexible as needed, because we want people to be making art if they can.
Anyone else about music space or spaces for musicians to rehearse? I know that outside is also an option, of course at social distance, but if anybody else in the panel has any other advice or knowings of any other music rehearsal space.
I can, this is Stacy Handler. Hi, Managing Director of Urbanity Dance, she, her, hers. Hi everyone, so nice to see all your faces. Similarly to Peter, we are trying to figure out our spaces for dance, but in the meantime, I agree, I think they would be fabulous for musicians, especially probably chamber groups, maybe 5 or fewer. And as Matt said, I think protocols around signing in, signing out, reserving the space, the cleanliness, all of that, we're working out, but it's certainly open to musicians and theater movement artists other than dance, I think, right now, just because of its physical attributes. And similarly around price would be probably 10 to 25 an hour, depending on the space.
Great, I'll move on to the next question. As a dancer, I'm wondering if there is any guidance on dance spaces or large artist gatherings. I think, Peter, you talked a little about this. We also have Debra Cash, who may be able to talk a little bit about this as well.
You want to continue, Peter?
I'm sorry, I was typing, so I didn't hear the question. Is it artist gathering?
About dance spaces, what are the guidance for dance spaces and large artist gatherings? Yes.
Sure. Yeah, Debra's got an encyclopedia in her head, I know, because she's been compiling all this stuff. It's pretty amazing. So I'll speak very little and hand it over to her. I think we are, first rule of order is safety, and we are looking toward outsourced spaces as well, and especially through October. And Central Square is the Business Improvement District is building a space that will be usable part of that time, but we're also on the lookout for more. So, and we're happy to help coordinate anything in Central Square or near the studio as need be in that way. I think gathering for performance inside is a little hard, and we're not going to do it probably through the fall. Debra.
Yeah, so I think whoever asked this question probably knows that performances with audiences are probably going to be late in the fall, in the winter, late phase 3, phase 4, depending on how many people are there. The issue is going to be both social distancing and then the environment of the building, as Matt was talking about in terms of airflow and things like that, but also the question about, can you control the audience's movements so that it's not just, can you have people sitting, 6 feet apart, but how do you get them into the building? How do you get them out of the building? How do you deal with your bathrooms? How do you deal with emergency exits? Things like that. So it's very unlikely you're going to be able to do anything inside that engages people in groups of more than 10 until we're into phase 4. That said, you can start thinking about what you want to do and start lining up some of those spaces. The rehearsal process is very much the way Peter and Stacy were talking about in terms of small groups. You do have to be clear that partnering is not acceptable anytime soon. That certain kinds of social dancing that rely on touch is something you should not be doing. Even if you are young and seeming to be healthy and uninfected, you have to presume that every single person is an asymptomatic carrier. That is the baseline safety issue. The reason that Pascale and Peter were kind of teasing me about all the things I have been thinking about with this is that one of the things that Boston Dance Alliance took on was to start gathering the information and drafting the reopening guidelines for studios. And that's been submitted, but it has not been vetted by the public health folks. So I do hope that we'll have a lot more information about indoor use in the next couple of weeks.
I see that my colleague, I think Paul from the Parks Department is on the call. And Paul, I just want to thank you so much for coming today. And while we're on the subject of rehearsing, and if people in theater or dance or music, are kind of grappling with figuring out how to rehearse going forward, I'm wondering if there's a perspective you'd like to share on parks and kind of how you all are thinking about that and use of the park space.
I think I'm Paul McAfee. I'm the director of permitting for the Parks Department, and him, pronoun his, her, him. I just wanted to let people know, I mean, it's a difficult time, and one of the things that brings joy to people is music and dance and theater. I think that somewhat the creativity about being outside is going to be important. As far as acoustic music goes and the street musicians, I think that is a continual, that's an outlet. I think that, one or two people, practicing a scene in a park is definitely acceptable. I think that, I'm seeing things like you all are when there's more webinars and calls about, how to do stuff. And then it's like, then you have to hurry up and wait and figure out when the next phase is going to be. And that's probably what a lot of us are doing, reading the tea leaves all the time and trying to interpret them for people. I see the next phase, somewhat in, 3 that is going to allow me to do competitive sports. And so right now what we're telling people is no more than 12, 6 feet apart and 25 feet apart from the next group. And so, if you can figure out a way that would work for what you're trying to do, that would be something that we'd be interested in. Part of the issue too is that we're seeing all these people do whatever they want to do. Yesterday at Moakley Park, there was probably about 500 people not doing anything that the city of Boston or the governor of the state of Massachusetts has been telling people to do. And so our good law-abiding folks that are trying to do the right thing every day see that, and then they basically send you a note and saying, how can you let that happen? And most of it is we're really counting on people's civic mindedness for compliance. And it's difficult. My daughter is a dance instructor and a dancer, And, you know, she's figured out a lot of different things over the period of time about how to get stuff done. You know, so I think that if, you know, we're doing fitness classes. And so our fitness classes may be limited to 10, but we're also broadcasting it out on, you know, social media or Zoom while we're doing that exercise class. So I don't know if that's helpful. I'll try to be as helpful as possible. And the other part of it too is if you have a temporary art project that that needs to go through the art commission process, you know, we'll try to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of artists are tied up with their family obligations. Kate Gilbert and I worked together a lot. And like one of the artists who was going to do something down at the waterfront park, she got tied up with, you know, raising her kids because the school department's closed. So she had to do that. And then she had to drop what she was doing for art, so her art exhibit. So I understand that, and we try to work as best we can. I'm really hoping that the fall is going to be the better part of the season. We still don't have any real direction about large events. I noticed today that one of the big concert promoters is putting on a drive-in concert in 3 venues around the country, but not here in Boston. And my Billy Joel tickets were canceled, so I'm not very happy. But there are other things that are still going on. So people are figuring it out. It's just a question, you know, and we can help you. We're going to do drive-in. We're going to do 2 drive-in movies this summer. And so that may be potentially a good method of bringing some art to some people. Just it's a very limited thing, but that's really what we're doing. Trying to be as helpful as possible.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
The fitness classes, that's groups of 10 because we're still at the limit of 10
Actually,
for gatherings
by the way,
statewide.
just so you know, there's 2 memos out, okay? This is like, you know, Khrushchev's letter to Kennedy and the missiles of October. There's 2 letters, okay? The later letter has 12. The earlier one has 10. So I just adjusted to 12. So if anybody needs that document, I'll be glad to send it to them. But it says 12 now. The new one coming out says 12.
And do folks in those classes still have to wear face coverings?
Not when they're exercising, as long as they're practicing social distancing.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So this is mostly for art spaces. Are there any art spaces where artists can create without an audience and have it streamed? Is that a viable option?
I'm seeing head nods from the Record Co., from Urbanity, from who else? The Dance Complex, from the BCA, from the Calderwood. So let's see, it looks like a lot of people are saying yes, they'd be excited to help out with that. If I missed anyone, feel free to say yes also in the chat.
I don't know if Artists and Humanities online, but I'm doing a thing with them on A Street Park where afternoons, they're gonna take their kids and do portrait classes, socially distanced, spaced out at A Street Park. If anybody could think, you know, something like that as well. We're also doing pics in the park. We're trying to encourage people to send pictures to us.
People may also want to check with their neighborhood churches and other community spaces, because there are things that if you know you're only going to be using something during the week or in the morning, they are open and they may be able to accommodate you given social distancing, wearing masks, airflow, those issues.
Just to speak to the live streaming a little bit, since June 1st at the Calderwood, we've really been working in our spaces to just test out all of our protocols with staff and maintenance in the space. And things have been going really well. We feel really confident in our contract tracing and limits on occupancy. And what we're doing now is getting rid of all of the shows, striking all the materials, but actually we're leaving all the stages set with rep soft goods and lighting plots so that we're sort of ready to go for anything that kind of comes our way. I am in some conversations with groups about doing live stream where they would like a stage for presentation. So I'm happy to work with people. I don't know cost yet because of course things are just sort of so out of scale, and I think we want to definitely make sure that things are affordable. But with all the precautions we have to take with the extra cleanings, we just have to make sure that we're kind of balancing things out. But I would say if anybody's interested, I'll throw my email into the chat, and then just to reach out. You know, at the Calderwood we have a variety of spaces, and so I'm happy to work with people in terms of what would be needed. Right now, we don't anticipate having any audiences in the building through the end of December. And so we're going to try to focus on other creative ways to use the space. So while I don't have all the answers, I'm happy to take all the questions to try to figure out what's the best use of space. And I say that and hopefully looking over to my partners at the BCA, making sure they feel similarly.
Yes, no, absolutely. Similarly at BCA, hi, I'm Christy, Co-Executive Director. I'm here with Emily Foster-Day, other Co-Executive Director. And we are thinking outside of the box because all of our contracted rentals in our theaters and the cyclorama space have obviously been canceled or deferred to a future date. And we are creatively thinking at ways that we can fall within the protocols and guidelines that have been set, but socially distanced. Obviously, the cyclorama is a space where social distancing is possible, but we're just trying to figure out what that looks like given our own budget constraints and figuring out our cleaning protocols, sanitation practices. But all of those policies are being drafted now and should be finalized over the summer. So we're hoping to figure out what that pricing structure will look like in this new model, and also the spaces that we operate in the Calderwood with the Huntington. So absolutely, I'm happy to share my contact information as well and get all the questions so that hopefully come fall, we will have some models that we can share.
Great. Another question we had from last week was about resources for teaching artists, specifically visual. Would love any help with Zoom teaching for visual artists. Anyone have any resources or things they've been seeing around?
Lecolion here, Community Music Center of Boston, the He series. As an organization that does a lot of work in Zoom, I would say that, you know, right now what we have been doing at the Community Music Center of Boston we've kind of opened it up a little bit as it relates to the different platforms that people can use. And it's been really helpful for us. The other thing that we've been doing a lot of is trying to find out what's the best way for us to have synchronous and asynchronous programming, which is really interesting because as educators know that those words really well, and now everyone knows asynchronous and synchronous. Educators have been talking about that for 30 years. It's really interesting that now we as artists, we actually know what those terms mean. But one of the things that we've been doing, depending on what type of work it is if it's collaborative work, we've been doing some work around video editing. And so a lot of our faculty have been learning a lot on the video editing side. So if you see some of our performances, we have several of them on our YouTube channel, and a lot of them have been edited, but it's been a way for us to continue to build an educational community. So it's not all just one-on-one instruction, which is not really the culture of our place. I mean, our model is built one-on-one instruction, but as a cultural institution, we think a lot about building community. And so that's not always the best for us. So what I would recommend for any organization that is doing teaching artists work is to try to be as flexible as possible. I think we originally started being pretty restrictive, but we realized that it was a really inequitable way of having access to educational programming. And so we opened up our structures quite a bit. So that would be the first thing. But I would say that overall, as a teaching artist, I think that one of the things to be mindful of is student safety. And that's something that I don't feel like is always talked about. We think about it from the technological space, but not just from an overall student safety space, because you have a teacher alone with a student, sometimes in a room with no guidance and no oversight. And so for us, that's something that we think quite a bit about. So for us, on the safety side, the parent has to be present in the screen and essentially giving permission for, or a parent or caregiver has to give permission for our teacher to be with that student. And so that's one of the ways, and it's not really not just from a liability perspective, but it's really more just an overall student safety and really faculty and our teacher safety as well. And so those are just a few things on the teaching artist side that, in addition to the technological things, the other area that I think is quite a challenge right now is overall just student and teacher safety.
Julia, is it okay if I go?
Yeah, please.
Right. Hi, this is Nicole with Open Door Arts. I apologize for if there's background noise. I have my own rehearsing musician at home. I'm gonna throw my email in the chat box with two resources, one existing and one in the works. The existing one is a guide of sorts that we put together for our school program. So we have a program called Cool Schools where we work with teaching artists in partnership with teachers. And we put together a resource called 7 Tips for Accessible Online Learning. We've been doing a lot of trainings since then with a bunch of different groups, but focusing on accessibility in online learning, but I would say encompassing a lot of best practices in general that are applicable to any setting. You know, just kind of starting with the idea that you're working with students with disabilities, whether you know it or not, and whether it's a part of your model or not, but also thinking about some of these practices just being really good teaching practices in general that sometimes we forget when we're transitioning to online space. So we have a slideshow that we've used for these presentations, and then captioned recordings of a couple of the presentations, and we're happy to share those if those are helpful to anyone. And then the second thing that is still in the works, and again, I'll share my email if you're interested, please reach out, is we're working with the Elliott School for Fine and Applied Arts and with Wheelock Family Theater and potentially more partners to put together a summer teaching artist institute-ish of sorts that's going to be focusing on anti-racist pedagogy, inclusive teaching practices, and trauma-informed teaching, and how you apply those things in the online setting, kind of responding to the urgency of this moment and how necessary it is for teaching artists to really be doing that work very intentionally before we get back in the classroom in September. And even in the summer. But if anybody is interested, we're still in the process of figuring things out. We're looking for funding, we're looking for partners, but you know, just getting an idea of whether this is interesting to folks in general would be helpful to us in the development. So I'll throw my email in the chat box, and yeah, let me know if you're interested.
Thank you, Nicole. And just a quick thing I want to add is that I know the Guild for Community Arts Education has put together a lot of great webinars for teaching artists during this time. And in addition to that, the Freelance Artist Resource website has put together some resources as well. So I'll just drop those into the chat.
All right, I do have one more question before we open it up to Q&A. So are there initiatives in Boston for musicians who are not able to perform live due to COVID-19? Summer is traditionally a time when a lot of musicians make money performing at restaurants, weddings, festivals, and on tour. Money made from performances allow musicians to hire other people in the music industry to use that money to record music and to pay administrative costs. Are there grants or projects happening for musicians to focus on non-performance work like recording and writing? How is the City of Boston and other local organizations specifically helping musicians? Is the mayor reallocating any funds from the BPD to arts and performing arts?
So I can go ahead and answer the last question and first. Cara Elliott-Ortega, she, hers, Chief of Arts and Culture for the city. There isn't any of the reallocated funding from the police budget that is going to the arts office. So our budget as it is proposed right now for next year for FY21 includes a small increase, but it's not specifically funding from the police budget. And that's pending approval at a city council hearing tomorrow.
I know nobody wants to say it, but I think unfortunately the answer is there are not a lot of opportunities at the moment. You know, at Record Co, we stood up a very, very small, like, urgent grant program that for music makers that were experiencing lost income, which was immediately overwhelmed. And so unfortunately, we've had to close the application process for that. And there's still 500 or 600 people who have not been funded. So, and I think when we look at the larger concert promoters too, kind of as a bellwether for what's coming, you know, we see that the larger, more resourced concert promoters have canceled performances and large tours through the middle of next year. You know, for them, like, half of 2021 is already off the table. So again, without a more satisfying answer, and I hurt deeply that I can't give you a better answer. I think this is a moment where we as a music community need to come up with some new ideas. And I'm thinking too, and I promise I will tell you as soon as I have something good to share, but sorry that you're experiencing that.
One thing that I will add is that just an update while I have you all here. So our Artist Relief Fund grant that the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture ran with our partners at the Boston Center for the Arts has been able to fund 515 artist relief grants. That is a little more than half of the applications we received. So we haven't been able to fund all the applications we received. So that's something that we're still, you know, looking into and trying to figure out to the best of our abilities. We have a new budget that turns over on July 1st, and we are including in our budget again this year our grant called the Opportunity Fund, which is a grant for individual artists who either are putting together events or experiences, which will, you know, likely be virtual ones, at least over the next 6 months or so. And it's a grant that artists can use to kind of further their careers. So that's very open-ended, and we have left the grant intentionally very open-ended, and we, you know, hope and encourage that people will continue to apply for that when it reopens next week. That grant has $200,000 allocated to it. So we have usually done grants of $1,000 in the past for career development and $2,000 for virtual events. We're still kind of looking into all the details of what our grant will look like this year, but we will be doing it. And we will, I think, at least be able to make 200 grants that way.
Hi, sorry, I'm Naomi Westwater, she, her series. I asked the question. So I guess I'm just wondering, it seems like there really aren't resources outside of unemployment for a lot of performing arts right now. And so I'm just wondering, who should we be getting in contact to ask for more money to be allocated to the arts? Like, should we be contacting the mayor? Should we be contacting the city council? Obviously, there are tons of artists, performing artists, who are going to run out of unemployment before January 2021 comes along. And I'm not sure how people are supposed to afford to live in the city if they can't make money, so.
Hi, Naomi. So I'm Emily Ruddock. I'm the executive director of MASSCreative, a statewide arts advocacy organization, and every single level of government is the answer, right? So what we're sort of tracking, we're watching, is that since March, we saw the state sort of realize that they were going to run out of money in terms of revenues, and that they then looked to the feds to see what the feds were going to do. The federal government put together 3 stimulus bills, the third one being the CARES Act. The CARES Act, which has had 2 sort of extensions. One, and obviously the CARES Act is the piece of legislation that included the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, right? Then on the federal, so then the question was, the state said, we want to see more money, and local municipalities, so cities were saying, states, you got to help us out. And the feds have held off. So the House has now filed like 1.5 stimulus relief bills that the Senate has refused to take up. So that's what's happening. So there's advocacy that needs to to happen, even with a very, I would say, our federal congressional delegation says they support the arts. They need to know exactly what is happening, particularly to individual creative workers in this moment, and why the extension of PUA is so important, why making sure that any sort of legislation they are crafting actually reflects down to helping the workers, not just the organizations that are part of our creative ecosystem. Then if we're talking on the state level, so real quickly, there's been some movement on the state level in terms of some quick bills to keep the government, the workings of the state government going, but they haven't seemed to put out anything that's about like the fiscal year 20 budget process and project. There needs to be advocacy at that level. And I would say specifically to say the creative community is delivering, which is powered by individual workers, has delivered major economic and communal benefits before COVID-19 hit, has continued to do during COVID-19. And if you want a fully recovered Massachusetts, then you have to take care of its creative workers now. And so that is advocacy you can do to your state reps. And then in terms of Boston, yeah, I mean, I think that we're tracking, and we're part of a community that's seeing how decisions about, and Cara, I know this is being recorded, but we are seeing how decisions are being made about allocating emergency resources, both in terms of what money is coming down from the federal government, in terms of the community development block grant programs. The CARES Act did include some aid for state and municipalities. And I think there's a call to say, where is that money going, and how can the creative community be included in that conversation? One of the things I'm just tracking is that all the organizations who are on that call are talking about how they are working really quickly to retrofit their spaces to support the creative work that's happening in the greater Boston area. And a number of the questions are like, how do we do this work? So let's start advocating and talking to the Economic Development Office about providing funds that allow us to pivot and adapt our work, to respond, to be able to continue to make money and generate that income, even in a moment when we can't come together. So that is my answer. And finally, MASSCreative, I'll put in the chat box, has a couple of different advocacy tools that you can use. We continue to stand up more and more as we go along. If you have feedback about ones that you'd like to see or ask for, I'll include my email, drop me a line, and we will continue to make sure that those tools are being useful for your work, for your needs.
Hey, this is Erin. Can I just jump in on something Emily just said? So I'm Erin Harris, she, her, and I work for the Graphic Artists Guild, but I'm also a member of MALC, the Massachusetts Artists Leaders Coalition, and we do work with MASSCreative on a couple of advocacy things. And what Emily was talking about in terms of doing the advocacy, it can help when you're talking to your reps or whoever you're talking to, is to make the point about the economy, about what the arts bring into the state, wherever you are in the state. The Americans for the Arts has information on their site for every state about how, like, what the economic information is. And MALC put a report together last year, or 2 years ago. I have no concept of time anymore. 2 years ago, about Massachusetts specifically, that you can get on our website that has more information. So if you are framing it as an economic issue and a labor issue, you can get a lot, like the reaction is usually better rather than trying to go for the more emotional or philosophical or whatever we want to call it. But going that tack usually has more impact in getting people to listen to you. So that's all I wanted to throw in there.
Awesome. I think I see a hand. Tom has a question. Ooh, can't hear you, Tom. So sorry, Tom, we cannot hear you. So I think you might have to put your question in the chat. Your sound is not coming out.
Alexa, what's the temperature outside?
While Tom figures that out, we did have another question about when schools will be opening in the fall. I know I've heard a hybrid of things from each district. I know some districts are going virtual for a bit, but I don't know, Cara, or if anyone else has info about schools, not universities, just regular public schools and charter schools opening in the fall.
Lecolion here, Community Music Center in Boston. For those of you who may join later, the He series. From what we are hearing, so the Community Music Center of Boston, we are one of the largest providers of, one of the largest outside providers of arts education in BPS. And so we have quite a strong relationship with the school system. And so far, the conversations that we've been having have been with renewing our contracts with the schools, some of the schools for next year. So it sounds like that until people hear otherwise, it seems like people are operating under the assumption that that the schools are going to open in September. But of course, I think everyone knows right now that is a conversation that is basically in flux. I'm also a parent, and I have children in the Boston public school system. And as a parent, basically what we're also hearing is principals are saying they don't know, but they're operating under the assumption that schools are going to be starting in September. And so for us organizationally, we're operating under the same assumption. But I would say as an organization though, if your business model is built upon the Boston public schools opening, I would recommend creating a new line of business. And that's just the truth. Because we don't know. And if that's your primary business model, then diversifying that particular portfolio, especially on the earned revenue side, probably makes some sense. But again, so far of the multiple partners that we have, even the contracts that we might have lost, we've lost them not because people are afraid that the schools aren't opening. In some cases, it's been that the schools committed more to arts, and so they've hired a music teacher and said they don't need us anymore. And to us, that's a big win. We consider that to be a contract worth losing. And so, but we haven't gotten any word yet that the schools are not going to open in September, but we also didn't get word that step 2 of phase 2 was going to be yesterday. And so I would say that, with that question, everyone is essentially going to be operating under, I would imagine we might be the last ones to know, especially in their arts community, unless you're directly inside BPS. Yeah, and I agree with what just in support of Julia's comment, that is what we are preparing for, and the idea that outside partners aren't going to be invited in. But we all, alongside that, we do have some MOUs with some schools moving into next year as if they're going to be having us doing that work. Now, they may decide they want us to continue to work online, much like we've done over the last several months. But as far as the relationships with the arts organizations right now, those are pretty much staying intact.
Thanks, Lecolion. Tom, were you able to figure out your microphone to ask your question? You're muted now, so just unmute yourself. I can do it for you. Hold on. Tom? You're still, there you go. No, we still can't hear you, I don't think. So I'll go to the next question while Tom figures out the sound issue. We had a question about if singing is safe outside. And I know that's mostly depending on social distancing, but if there's any music organizations that want to talk about rehearsing, singing outside, if it's safe, and how musicians can create protocols for that.
You mind if I answer this one as well? This is Lecolion again. I just literally had a conversation with my entire staff about this like an hour ago. So I apologize for, I feel like and I will step back. You have my word after this one. The word that we are getting is that singing is a no-no. For so many reasons. It's not just about the expelling of the air, it's also the inhaling. So if you can sing without expelling air loudly and without inhaling, then probably singing is okay. But I would say outside of that, what I have been hearing from literally every corner of the medical field is that singing is something that should not be done. Now, of course, again, everyone's going to do their own risk assessment, but I have heard that singing, it puts you at an extremely high risk, and it's very contagious. That is what I have been hearing, not only from doctors, but also from the National Choral Society, National Association of Teachers of Singing. They've also put something out that came out months ago, I think a couple of months ago, that they said that it is not recommended to be doing singing at all, but specifically group singing. So any type of group singing is considered to be an absolute no-no. And now on the instrumental side, wind instruments, there's still a lack of clarity there. If you're in a place that has wind instruments, there's still quite a bit of lack of clarity. I've heard so many different things that I've essentially in my own organization just said no wind playing until, I'm a bassoonist, I'm a wind player myself, but I've said no wind playing until we get more information, because the information has said flute is okay, trumpet's not okay. I'm not exactly sure how they're that much different. And so, to be honest. And so again, I have essentially told my organization that we're not going to have on-site wind instruction or wind programming until we get some more information. But what I know I wouldn't say as a fact, but I've heard it from enough different places and reputable spaces that singing, and particularly group singing, is probably not the greatest idea during this time. But again, everyone does their own risk assessment, but the singing groups have essentially been deemed super spreaders.
Great. We have about 10 minutes left of the hour, and I just wanted to give opportunity for anybody else to put in any questions they may have before we close out.
I would just like to add to what Lecolion was saying. I think this is going to be something where in phase 3, we see the state start to make things allowable, and just want to say that just because it becomes allowable doesn't mean that the risk isn't there. So I would just plant that note of caution for everyone. Everyone's got to do their own risk assessment for them and who they're responsible for. So just because it's possible to, maybe according to the state, gather and sing, doesn't mean that that's going to be informed by all of the science that Lecolion was just talking about. So just to really do that investigation and think about what steps you can take to mitigate things, even if the state is saying that it's okay to gather and do that activity.
I saw a question about how the drive-in gigs would work for bands on the stage with a singer. I'm not sure if Paul is on the call anymore, but Paul from the Parks Department, who spoke earlier, I know that Paul dropped his email in the chat, and we'll be happy to share everything from the chat after this call if anyone isn't able to take it down now, but you're welcome to reach out and ask.
I will say one thing that we noticed in the guidelines from the state around drive-ins is that they specifically say for movies only. So one of the things that we've been communicating back to the governor's reopening committee is to add "and other kinds of live performance" to that, because technically right now the drive-in is just for films.
We have a question about singing outdoors in extreme outdoor areas, Boston waterfront, Harbor Islands. I don't know if anyone has been able to explore that option yet successfully. Any other questions you have for our panelists today? We have about 8 minutes.
I actually just have a quick question. Recently, SAG and AFTRA and IATSE released guidelines mainly for the film industry, but sort of how they can kind of get back to working safely. And a lot of it had to do with rapid testing, that like their core group of actors couldn't come together safely without social distancing, without PPE, unless they could do daily testing. And I didn't know if the city had any idea about when more testing could become available for certain core groups of people to be able to get back together.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have an immediate answer to that, but we can, I know we got a lot of questions about availability of testing when we had our last Friday call as well. So we should circle back with public health and see if we can give you an answer on that, but I don't have one right now. I don't know if, do we have anyone else on the call who can speak to testing right now? I don't think so, but we'll follow up with you.
One question I remember, if it's okay for me to chime in, from last week is that we had some folks asking questions about outdoor markets and open studios events and stuff like that. And I know that we have my colleague Jacob on the line who works in our streets department, kind of thinking about usage of the public realm. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts to share about that. And then I also know that Randi from the BCA is on the line, and I know you all often have open studios at the BCA, and so I'm wondering kind of if that's something that you're thinking about. So Jacob, if you wouldn't mind popping in, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, thanks so much, Julia. I think, so right now our focus is somewhat on trying to repurpose streets for activities that are either to increase mobility in ways that enable better social distancing, or activities like outdoor dining at restaurants that where folks are seated, are making reservations, or sort of, so not necessarily congregating in large groups, but sort of spaced out from one another. And we've seen sort of a rapid development of those types of interventions, like seating in parking spaces across the city. I think we are open to all sorts of other ideas or projects, especially as we think about a summer where large events are not going to be possible. So things that can be done with fewer people, or more physical interventions. I think we're seeing an openness and an appetite to that. Even I know some of these restaurants have deployed jersey barriers that are big hunks of concrete that could be turned into a lot of other more interesting things or interesting places. I'm not sure how that relates to performing necessarily quite yet. I think we're still going to have to take things one step at a time. Thanks.
Thank you, Jacob. And Randi, I don't know if just quickly you wanted to share kind of what you all are thinking about in terms of open studios.
I mean, we always work with the United South End artists on that. So that's really a partnership, and it is high on my list to check in and see. As far as I know, they haven't announced anything, but that's usually the second or third week in September. And I feel like that's highly, highly unlikely that that's going to be able to take place this year. Partly because of the new Boston Area Code Art Fair, or New England Area Code Art Fair that's going to be taking place in August. I actually feel like we have a really exciting opportunity for artists to share their work and sell their work really broadly and showcase the fine work being done here. Tight deadline on that of July 7th, I think, but I really encourage any artists on this call to look up the Area Code Art Fair and sign up, because that's going to be a really amazing opportunity. And so we're supporting that and doing everything we can to spread the word to artists for the availability of that opportunity. That is going to be an opportunity for performing artists, video artists, for artist talks, so scholars and other academics or people who would want to be involved in that way, as well as 2D or 3D, more traditional art mediums. So that's happening. I also, just for us, we're activating the Mills Gallery front windows with art. We're doing big experiments in continuing our public art residency. It is going to be interesting to see how these actually play out, because we also are extremely respectful of our restaurants on the BCA's Plaza, trying to get back in business and be able to have a lively activity on the plaza for their purposes this summer. So there's going to be some negotiating with that, but hopefully we'll be able to have work with artists doing things on the plaza and through our exhibition program, more participatory things, even to potentially opening up our studio building to bring in some new artists too, but we're taking that extremely carefully, one step at a time right now. Is that helpful? Are there questions about that?
That's super helpful. Thank you.
I'm also easy to find and to email if people have specific questions for me.
And for those of you who don't know about these meetings, Julia Ryan just put the link where you can find information to sign up for these meetings. We try to do them every other week, but with last week's meeting and people wanting some more answers, we did another week. And there are recordings of the meetings on that page as well. So you're welcome to find the recordings and look at previous meetings that we've had, as well as sign up for the next meetings that are coming up.
And one more thing I just want to say, and I'll drop this in the chat as well, is that in addition to our newsletters, if you want to hear kind of on a more like moment-to-moment basis from our team, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Our handle is arts, A-R-T-S, plural, in Boston. So I'll just drop that in as well.
All right, it is 5 o'clock. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Like we said, if you want to know more information about our next meeting, please use the link that's in the chat, and you can register for our next meeting there, as well as see previous recorded meetings from our other meetings as well. Have a great Tuesday, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks all.
Thank you everyone so much for coming today.